So I wanted to start and talk a little bit about a kind of hero and villain story. And not to keep it that simple, but I'm here today to talk a little bit about how Bitcoin got stronger after China tried to ban it. And to me, the thread of the story is that China is the state that is the most capable and willing to attack permissionless networks. The fact that Bitcoin and Nostr have survived these attacks and grown even stronger, and that there is adoption of Bitcoin and Nostr in mainland China, shows the resilience of these permissionless networks. So first, I want to start a little bit, I guess, with the villain narrative, which is the Chinese surveillance state. So just some quick pointers about it. There are approximately 1 camera for every 2 Chinese people, about 600 million CCTV cameras with advanced facial recognition that tracks everything from jaywalking to any other activity on the street. China also has a really advanced data infrastructure, an indigenous capability to hold data on its citizens and keep it within its borders. This includes everything from financial data, when it comes to payment processors like WeChat and Alipay, to DNA, to mobile and identity data. And of course, there is the Great Firewall. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Great Firewall is China's way of blocking mainland Chinese people within China, from accessing the internet abroad. And this is accomplished through a number of technical measures that has even included surface-level attacks, or quite deep attacks, on Tor and other networks used to circumvent. As a result of this, however, Chinese usage of VPNs is some of the highest in the world. And we'll talk a little bit about how, even with all these restrictions, permissionless networks like Bitcoin can still thrive. So I want to point out kind of 3 unique things about the Chinese surveillance state that you might not be aware of in terms of this general approach. The first is the pervasive use of facial recognition, really across the board. And not only facial recognition, but also the ability to have that displayed right back at you. When I mentioned the jaywalking, you can take a look at videos of people jaywalking in the streets, and there are video screens shooting back what their identity is back right at them. So it's kind of this very pervasive use and acceptance of facial recognition. Now, what do I mean by offline-online connection? I want to tell you all a little bit of a story. I actually used to be the admin of Clubhouse back in the day, the largest English language room about China, as well as one of the Bitcoin Club admins way back when. And we used to have a running room where we would ask people if they had been taken in by the police to have tea. That's when you know you're in trouble, when the police ask you to come in for tea. And this was based off of people's online expression. There are people that I know, or friends of friends, who have been arrested just solely for their expression online. And whereas you can argue that this is getting less and less unique in the world, and that is a tragedy, in China, it's very, very specifically targeted, so that you could be tweeting to 50 people and still get arrested for it. And there's, of course, the social credit score and the Great Firewall, which kind of act together. I'm not going to be able to get into the details of the social credit score, but in essence, the fact that China is able to hold all its data and its internet together allows it to collect, surveil, and control its population. So where does Bitcoin fit into this? To me, Bitcoin, this is kind of one of the perfect use cases of Bitcoin. And what I always tell people is, in cybersecurity, there's this concept of a red team. And what a red team means is it's a sophisticated adversary that is sufficiently motivated to attack your system. That is China. And Bitcoin is the entity being red-teamed by China. So I'm sure you all have heard the meme, China has banned Bitcoin. China has banned Bitcoin 1 million times. How many more times can China actually ban Bitcoin? Well, I'm here to tell you that there's a specific number of times it's been banned, and what will happen after. So I'm going to kind of walk it through with you all. So, First, there was the ban on Chinese banks using Bitcoin. But that didn't really matter because Bitcoin never needed banks. That was the whole point of Bitcoin in the first place. Then there were the takedown of KOL accounts. These are kind of influencers in the Asian sphere. And even though we're at a conference full of influencers, I think we can all agree that Bitcoin will keep on doing its thing regardless of whether or not people tweet about it. Then there was the idea that exchanges could be restricted, and there could be a restriction of ICOs and a bunch of more like crypto stuff, which the Chinese state enforced. But, Bitcoin doesn't need to be on an exchange necessarily in order for it to thrive. And I'll go into it a little bit more, but I've categorized almost dozens of ways that Chinese people can still buy Bitcoin or Tether. There was a mining ban, but I am happy to report to everybody here that through multiple sources, there is still physical Bitcoin mining happening in China as of today. And not only that, global hash rate and the amount of mining that is securing the Bitcoin network has only grown since the 2021 mining ban. Finally, there has been law enforcement arrests. I categorized, 1,200 people plus in 2022 who were arrested for crimes involving virtual currencies trading in China. And there is the takedown of apps like Damus and pretty sophisticated technical attacks on Nostr, which involved taking the system down for access from mainland Chinese. But, not everybody can get arrested, and the internet itself can't be shut down, even though the Chinese state has tried very hard to do both. So to speak a little bit about that, these are just a couple of sample posts from some Chinese-based or Chinese diaspora-based Nostr users. At one point, Nostr and Damus were actually some of the most popular apps in Hong Kong and in China. And there is still a contingency of people who post on Nostr, sometimes even about their day-to-day stuff. I categorized a few thousand notes that were in simplified Mandarin, which is a pretty good tell that these people live in mainland China. And people were talking about everything from the metro stations in Suzhou to their day-to-day living and how they thought about gig workers. So not just about Bitcoin, there's a broader conversation happening on Nostr as well. You might be wondering, since we're talking a little bit about is Bitcoin illegal or legal in China a little bit, the short summary is that Chinese courts protect the ability for Chinese people to hold Bitcoin as property. So that's never been disputed, and that's been reinforced by several Chinese court rulings. But it is illegal to use Bitcoin as a currency, and exchanges are restricted. However, people from mainland China still continue to buy Tether and Bitcoin through various means. So just like I started talking about before, I've categorized like thousands, well, maybe not thousands, dozens of ways of doing this. There's people who buy a passport from a foreign country and they register on Binance. There's people who put down a fake address in Hong Kong or Taiwan. There's people who do peer-to-peer trade. There are Telegram groups. There are even WeChat groups where some people trade Bitcoin with one another and Tether. And there are finally over-the-counter trading exchanges. And for example, in Hong Kong, there's a lot of places where you can physically trade Bitcoin for fiat currency. And so just so we all know, Bitcoin accumulation by mainland Chinese is still happening, and China is still a very large part of the Bitcoin economy. Mining operations have expanded globally, and there still is Bitcoin mining happening in China, including in Xinjiang, where many Bitcoin mining operations have apparently never been shut down. And as I mentioned, it's not just Bitcoin, right? It's also Nostr, it's freedom tech in general. One of the coolest stories I've had is someone who was born and raised in China who came out to the overseas, right, and to do university. And she actually came up and told me that not only has accumulating Bitcoin made her realize that the digital yuan and the CBDC were bad, she actually started to realize that using WeChat Pay and Alipay were really, really bad ideas. So we see this spread, however small or slow, but very meaningful, of freedom tech around the world, including in China. And some of them are here at this conference and at other conferences, but there are a ton of Chinese entrepreneurs and VCs that are showing renewed or continued interest in Bitcoin that have been around maybe since 2013. So I'm also just going to show you all a couple of active MPubs. I'll keep it up for like a little while, but just so people know, there are people that do post. The beautiful thing about Nostr is a lot of the clients actually allow you to auto-translate what's happening, including Amethyst and others. And so you can actually read along and see kind of what's going on in another country that's censored, which I think is pretty cool. One of the cooler ones is actually we have a Mando Pop Prince, kind of like the equivalent of like if Taylor Swift was on Nostr and was continually trying to orange pill people. So that actually exists in the Mandarin ecosystem, which I find really cool. Michael's actually quite active on Nostr and takes zaps and things and everything around that. So what's kind of like the current state? Like what's the summary? I've kind of gone into it a little bit, but just to put it all together, in all honesty, a lot of the trade is in Tether. This is because the spread is lower. The US dollar has stronger psychological value for Chinese people. But there is still Bitcoin trade, and it's happening in these unofficial channels. And the Chinese government has acknowledged many times that it is unable to stop this behavior. China is still a very large part of the Bitcoin economy, and it continues to grow. And there are exciting, so some of you might know, for example, just through brief interaction, that there's a lot of cryptocurrency altcoin conversations in Asia. The Chinese scene is not immune to that. However, there are very active groups across the spectrum. And on Nostr specifically, there seems to be a noodle of Bitcoin maxis, which I find very interesting. To put that together into numbers, the 2021 is about when all the the mining bans, the exchange bans coupled with law enforcement really took place. And as you can see, since then, this is kind of a proxy from chain analysis, but the idea is this is the best quantitative measure we have, and it shows that demand for Bitcoin-associated OTC desks continues to grow 4x, 5x as the years have gone on. And we're seeing almost like a tripling, quadrupling of quarterly demand in Bitcoin from mainland Chinese. So I want to talk a little bit now about the narrative. I promised you all a little bit of hero and villain. And so, and not to be so black and white, I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that, but for the purpose of this presentation, obviously everybody here probably recognizes the man on the right, that is Xi Jinping, paramount leader of China right now. The man on the left is actually Liu He, who was vice premier of China. He is the one responsible for the Bitcoin mining ban in China. He actually said, Bitcoin mining is harmful for the whole of Chinese society. This is the beginning of the crackdowns and really everything that was happening through that. The reason why this is happening is because of the picture on the right. I'm assuming most of you don't read Mandarin, but what that says is digital yuan. That is China's version of the CBDC. And all of these bans and restrictions I talked to you about, this is part of China's plan to promote its central bank digital currency as the way to transact, or failing that WeChat Pay or Alipay, and to try to denigrate private networks, monetary networks such as Bitcoin. And so Liu He is kind of the one responsible. I encourage people to always read their enemies, and Liu He was also China's spokesperson at the meeting of the new champions in Davos. He has books on industrial policy and the kind of thinking for why there's a philosophical debate between China and Bitcoin. There's, of course, Hong Kong as well. We're not going to be able to cover it in detail, but I did want to show the contrast. In Hong Kong, of course, there is a spot Bitcoin ETF. Bitcoin is treated differently. There is one country, two systems, so it is separate from the Chinese mainland. However, there is definitely a comparison between having pan-democrat leaders arrested in jail, independent media as well, such as Stan News and Apple Daily, while trying to promote Hong Kong as a Web3 hub. So I did just want to shout that out really quickly. To start winding down a little bit, I'm sure some of you are kind of interested in, well, how does this heroes and villains narrative, why does it matter that China is trying to promote this CBDC, the world's most advanced CBDC? Why does that matter for me or for the people around me? And it can kind of break down a lot of different elements, but the short of it is that this global debate, China is a champion of a model that is trying to promote digital payments that are controlled or proxied by the government. And it is in the process of trying to onboard the next billion. As Bitcoiners, we always talk about the next billion. But the citizens of India, the citizens of Nigeria, they are following the Chinese model, for example, by embracing the digital rupee and CBDCs. This is happening now and live, and it's a very live debate. And the definition of what will happen here will determine what will win out in the world. So what's likely to happen in the future? Well, first, there's unlikely to be an unban. That's, I think, the first thing. Hong Kong is kind of positioned as a Web 3.0 hub. But as I mentioned, I feel that's a little bit more marketing than it is actual substance, both in terms of being Bitcoin related and in terms of the geopolitical positioning. China's economy is not doing great, and the central bank is printing money. That is a support factor for Bitcoin in many ways. China is watching Trump and the vice president, J.D. Vance. The vice minister of finance, formerly the number 2 in China, in charge of finance, actually said that the cryptocurrency ban was a mistake, acknowledging exactly what this slide says, which is that China tried to ban Bitcoin, but Bitcoin only grew stronger. Even the Chinese government has abandoned it. But it's unlikely that it's going to take unban steps, but it's also unlikely it's going to ban it further. Finally, there's this idea of war and peace and the global order. And I think Bitcoin, stablecoins, and CBDCs are going to have a very big stake in this. I think, and I fervently hope, that the world goes away from the warmongering and nationalism we see so present around the world today, and that Bitcoin will be a very large part of that discussion. Thank you, and this is how you can reach me.
Secure your BTC Prague 2026 ticket at the lowest possible price now.